Alright, how do you translate a movie title? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Let's take that as an example. Well, you can always translate it word by word, but then you hit the word massacre, and no matter what synonym you use, it's bringing up connotations that shouldn't be there. So you fudge the title up a little bit. Ah yes, the Texas Chainsaw Homicidal Maniac. It tells you precisely the genre, the character, and the tone. That's a level of intricacies you have to deal with, taking history, culture, and a whole bunch of other language-specific things into consideration. Chinese translation is especially annoying, not just because of how different these two languages work, but because there are no less than 3 different Chinese-speaking film industries. 4 if you count Singapore. Sometimes these markets can agree on a translation, but more often than not, they don't. Yeah, they all mean the same thing, just different wordings. But the situation also gives us a treasure trove of titles we can compare and contrast. So let's do just that. Broadly speaking, there are 4 ways you can translate a title. The first one is literal translation, sticking as close to the original meaning as possible. This is the simplest and safest method, very little room for misinterpretation, which is why it's usually used on big-budget blockbusters. But just because the translation is literal, doesn't mean it can be interesting. The 1996 horror movie Scream is translated literally by mainland and Taiwan, meaning screaming in fear. They're the exact same title, by the way, just traditional versus simplified Chinese. It's intentionally vague and kinda silly, just like its English title, alluding to the film's self-aware tone. But Hong Kong went one step further. You see, the last character here is a pun, meaning call. It can mean a deadly call for help, like a scream, but it can also mean a deadly call on the phone, referring to the opening sequence. The 2001 French romantic comedy Amélie is another example. Taiwan's Amélie's Fantasy World is actually closer to the original French title, Le Fabuleux Destin d'Amélie Poulain. Yes, I speak French. But Hong Kong and mainland translates Amélie's name phonetically into a pun. It sounds like Angel Amélie, but reads like Angel Loves Beauty. Which is clever because in a way the movie's about Amélie loving the beauty of the world and bringing happiness to people, like an angel. I would give it a chef kiss, but this movie's French, not Italian. That said, literal translation is safe, but not perfect. For one thing, you have to choose your words very carefully. Mainland China translates the Fast and Furious series as speed and passion. It sounds about right, but the word they chose for passion has a slight sexual connotation these days. It sounds kinda weird and dirty to a Chinese ear. I guess that's why there are so many homoerotic fanfics about the 2 protagonists. Now that I think about it, maybe it's intentional? And then sometimes a title just flat out can be translated. Tarantino's Pulp Fiction is one of those. The pulp in Pulp Fiction comes from the type of paper used for cheap novels. These novels usually feature sex, drugs, guns, and all sorts of tropes. It's a term that only really makes sense in English. Mainland translates it as lowbrow novel. The surface level meaning is preserved, but the context is pretty much entirely lost. Personally, I think Hong Kong's dangerous personnel best captures the vibe. And that leads to our second way of translating a title, reinterpretation. Instead of translating from the English title, this is when you come up with your own title, by interpreting the plot. It's usually a good way to deal with titles that can't easily be translated. The aforementioned Dangerous Personnel is a good example. Christopher Nolan's Inception is another example. It's about a bunch of thieves running around in people's dreams where reality is distorted. The word inception sounds cool and thrilling and imposing and cerebral, and there isn't really an equivalent word in Chinese. Taiwan attempted a literal translation, full-scale initiation, which is close, but not quite there. That's why mainland and Hong Kong came up with their own titles. Mainland calls it Dream Theft Dimension, which I think is absolutely amazing. Hong Kong's Dimensional Infiltration gives it a bit more of a spy thriller edge. The Matrix is another one with no equivalent words in Chinese, at least nothing as sci-fi and cool sounding. It sounds nerdy as heck. So instead, Taiwan and mainland both translated as the awesome sounding Empire of Hackers, capturing the scale and the coolness factor. Hong Kong's 22nd Century Killer Network is less cool. Yeah, I don't know why they call it that. Hong Kong's title for The Truman Show is great though. The title comes from a 24/7 reality show about the main character Truman, unknowingly living in a fabricated reality. Mainland and Taiwan went with the relatively safe Truman's World. Hong Kong went with reality show. But wait, it's not reality. Exactly. In fact, going word by word, the title literally means a show featuring real humans. And the movie is about Truman, a true man, and how his humanity breaks him out of fake TV reality. The Spike Jonze indie sci-fi romance film Her talks about a geek falling in love with an AI who sounds like Scarlett Johansson. Mainland just has a direct translation. Hong Kong is a bit more poetic, but Taiwan completely reinterprets the title, calling it Cloud-Based Lover, which not only hints at the technology behind the AI, but also the distance between the 2 characters and her intangibility. That's freaking awesome! Okay, one more, because this is fun. Inglourious Basterds, Tarantino's Nazi-exploitation film about a group of Jewish soldiers hunting Nazis for sport. While mainland and Taiwan gave a pretty straightforward translation, Hong Kong just gets Tarantino. I swear, I'm not making this up. Demon Hitler versus Homicidal Maniacs. It's ridiculous until you realize that's exactly the kind of movie Tarantino makes. Nazi exploitation. Like She-Wolf of the SS, just done well and tasteful. I guess Hong Kong and Tarantino just love each other. Did you know Mighty Peaky Man was distributed by Tarantino in the West? Now, reinterpretation may sound great, but it does have at least two potential pitfalls. The first one is, well, sometimes it doesn't age well. The Mission Impossible series was called Spies on a Disc in mainland China, referring to the list of spy names MacGuffin in the first movie. But then the series continues without that thing ever showing up again, and the title just completely loses all meaning. The Terminator is another example. Instead of using the villain's name, Hong Kong titles it after the hero's identity. Kyle Reese is a warrior, and he's from the future. But then the sequels put more emphasis on the Terminators, and Kyle Reese is almost entirely forgotten. The second translation pitfall is straight-up misinterpretations. This is when the translator just doesn't get the movie. Manchester by the Sea is a drama about a man confronting his own path after his brother's death. Hong Kong translates it as Love Ties to the Seaside Town. But it's not a love story, and it doesn't have that much to do with love. It puts the movie in a genre it doesn't belong. Contact is another one. It's about an astronomer trying to contact alien life while also dealing with her past trauma. So the Taiwanese title, Contact the Future, is kind of the polar opposite of what the astronomer is doing. She isn't really reaching to the future as much as she's freeing herself from the past. If you're planning on reinterpreting the movie title, you better be sure you have a firm understanding of the movie. On to the third way of translating, poetic translation. This is when you incorporate cultural context from the Chinese language into your translation. Kubrick's Lolita is a good example of this, a movie about a man's inappropriate obsession with an underage girl. The original book has a phonetically translated title in all three regions, but when the movie got released, Hong Kong and Taiwan got a bit cheeky with the title. It reads, A Pear Tree Crushing a Begonia, which comes from a famous poem written to mock old men who marry young women. It's beautiful on the surface, but a big yikes when you think about it. So, a perfect fit for the movie. Another similar example would be Knives Out, a murder mystery filled with tension. Both mainland and Taiwan chose existing idioms for their title. Mainland chose sharp blade unsheathed, meaning tension is high, people are one step away from killing each other. Taiwan chose blades curved and roads turned, meaning the story has taken an unexpected turn. Both titles reference the knives motif, but also give additional context through cultural references. Now, you don't always have to be classy either. Sharknado. Yes, Sharknado, a movie about sharks flying in a tornado, has one of the most poetic and funny Chinese titles I've ever seen. In Chinese, a tornado is called Dragon Twisting Wind. Naturally, mainland and Hong Kong replaced one of the words with shark, and it works. But Taiwan hilariously references a classic pop song in which the lyrics describe the romantic image of desert sands dancing in the wind, and since the words sand and shark are homonyms, well, now we have a hilarious mental image stuck in your head. Genius. Of course, like other methods, poetic translations can go wrong. Disney's Coco is a movie about a kid traveling the world of the dead, trying to find his musical idol. Mainland's Dream Chase Odyssey, good translation. Taiwan's Coco's Nightclub? Ugh, not so much. Okay, nightclub is a Taiwanese euphemism for cemetery, so it kinda cleverly alludes to the musical theme, the theme of death, the dazzling lights, but all that subtext is useless when the surface level text is more or less entirely out of whack. This is the definition of trying way too hard. Another seemingly beautiful one is Slumdog Millionaire, a movie about a young man going on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and through the show reconnecting with his childhood love. Hong Kong gave it a very poetic title, 1,000,001 Nights. It references the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire game show, and it's also a metaphor for the length of time the main character waited to meet his love again. It also feels like a fairy tale, because it references the book 1001 Nights, which, it's an Arabian book. This movie's set in India. God damn it, Hong Kong. Last, and also maybe the least exciting way, there's the marketing translation. This is when a title is fudged to make the movie more marketable. A basic example would be the 1994 Speed, a movie about a bus that explodes if it drives too slow. With a generic sounding title like Speed, Hong Kong added a word to signal its genre, speed of life and death. And since Chinese is such a compact language, you can usually get away with more complicated titles. Taiwan is especially fond of this type of marketing translation. Speed becomes Police Protector, Top Gun becomes Warrior Protector, and John Wick becomes Mission to Protect. The most infamous example is probably Shawshank Redemption, to which Taiwan gives the nonsensical translation of, and I did not make this up, Excitement 1995. Okay, let me explain. When Shawshank first came out in the US, it was a box office bomb, and with a nondescript title like that, I can see why. So the Taiwanese distributor marketed it as a spiritual successor to the 1973 movie The Sting, which was called Excitement in Taiwan. Excitement? Excitement 1995. And as far as I know, the strategy worked. It made box office record in Taiwan, so you may laugh at this, but Taiwan got it to work. The strategy is used for many Arnold movies too. They're marketed as the Demon series in Taiwan. Demon Terminator, Demon Commando, Demon Emperor, True Lies, Demon Jr. It's funny, but it works. Of course, it's not exclusively a Taiwanese thing. A lot of Pixar movies are also like this in mainland. Toys mobilized, undersea mobilized, racing cars mobilized, superheroes mobilized. Hong Kong has a similar shtick going on too. By now, you can already see the major problem with this method. It's mind-numbingly boring. 7, a detective thriller about a serial murder and the theme of the 7 deadly sins, is called Flashpoint Warrant. It conveys none of the mysteries and style of the movie. It sounds more like Donnie Yen is about to kick some ass. Shyamalan's Unbreakable is called Tribulations of the Undying in Mainland, a poetic way to describe the main character, a man who has above-average physique that makes him a real-life superhero. Taiwan just calls it thrilling. I have no idea why. So, that's 4 ways of translating a movie title into another language. Let's see. There's the direct translation, the safe but not always possible option. Reinterpretation, a good option to bring in some personality, but you have to make sure you understand the film well enough. The poetic translation, bring in cultural references to provide additional context. And the marketing translation. Boring, but it works. Of course, these options are not mutually exclusive, and it's generally ideal if you can achieve more than one at a time. But like all art forms, there's no definitive way to do it right, and that's also what makes the topic so much fun to look into. Have you paid attention to any movie titles lately? Take a look next time. You might be surprised by the amount of thought that goes into it. So, yeah,